In 1914, war had broken out with dramatic suddenness towards the end of a peaceful summer. A quarter of a century later, the tension in Europe mounted so steadily that by the end of August 1939, war seemed not only probable, but inevitable. Since March, when Hitler had absorbed Czechoslovakia in the German Reich in defiance of solemn agreements made the previous autumn, the powers had moved nearer to what appeared a foredoomed catastrophe. The deteriorating German-Polish situation dominated the European stage, and Britain and France believed that peace could be maintained only if they came to an agreement with Russia. However, preliminary conversations in Moscow foundered during August, and later that month, to the astonishment and consternation of the world, Russia and Germany signed a non-aggression pact. Hitler's fears of a two-front war were now removed, and he was free to settle with the Poles. On 1 September, German armies swept into Poland. 3 days later, Britain and France honored the pledges they had given Poland in an attempt to preserve the liberties of Europe and declared war on the aggressor. This time, Canada did not automatically enter the war by Britain's act as in 1914. On 7 September, the Canadian Parliament assembled in emergency session, and on the 9th it approved the government's policy of supporting Britain and France. On the 10th, the King proclaimed the existence of a state of war between Canada and the German Reich. The years between the wars now seemed nothing more than an uneasy truce. For the second time in a generation, Canada was at war with Germany, and throughout the nation there was a clear, if reluctant, determination to face the ordeal and whatever sacrifices it might bring. The week before the war broke out, Canadian coastal defenses had been manned, and on 1 September, the government ordered the mobilization of 2 divisions and ancillary troops from the militia. This time the prepared mobilization plan was followed. The confusion that had marked mobilization in 1914 was thus avoided, as was the creation of new units. Militia regiments mobilized and were brought up to strength by enlistment, and because the unanimity with which the country had entered the war was too precious to be destroyed, and because for the present there was no shortage of manpower, conscription was avoided. Every man attested into the Canadian Active Service Force, the CASF, was a volunteer. Despite the cold realism with which the war was received, men came forward briskly in a determined mood. In September alone, 58,337 men and women joined the Army, considerably more than during the comparable month in 1914. Many others were rejected on medical grounds or because of age, and some units were unable to recruit to full strength because of accommodation and clothing shortages. In December, the 1st Division under Major General A.G.L. McNaughton moved overseas in 2 main flights. Once again, Canadian troops had arrived in Britain in a time of danger. By February 1940, after the 3rd contingent had arrived, there were some 23,000 of them in Britain. After the opening campaign of the war had ended quickly with the brutal conquest of Poland, Germany built up strength throughout an uneventful winter, known at the time as the Phony War. On 9 April, a sudden German attack on Norway broke the uneasy quiet. Aid had to be sent to the small Norwegian forces, and since most of Britain's trained troops were in France, the War Office turned to the Canadians. McNaughton accepted the task, and on 18 April, a small Canadian force left Aldershot for Dunfermline, the Scottish port of embarkation. However, on the 19th, the British plan was changed and the Canadians never put to sea. Fighting continued in Norway until 8 June, when the last French and British soldiers were evacuated. The Canadians still looked forward to taking their place on the Western Front in France. There, the situation remained quiet. French experience in 1914, when a fanatical belief in the offensive had brought enormous casualties, had led to the scrupulous adoption of the defensive. Secure in the Maginot Line, French soldiers stared out from the slits in their concrete emplacements, while German soldiers, equally secure in the Siegfried Line, stared back. The British, holding defenses constructed during the bitter winter of 1939-40, faced the unfortified Belgian frontier.